Right, is my screen up there for everybody?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right, thanks everybody for jumping on a Sunday night. Hopefully won't take up too much of your time. For those who don't know me, I'm Chloe Dunmore. I'm currently the referee manager at Ballarat Basketball, and we've also got Kira Irvine on the call, and she's our Scoretable representative for the domestic level. So between the two of us, we'll be sort of sharing this online workshop together. So just a bit of an idea around domestic finals dates for this season. So we start our semi-finals on Friday the 2nd of September. So I think it gives us about 2 or 3 weeks left of the normal rounds. And then our grand finals start on Friday the 9th. Got somebody else joining. This is going to be a hassle. Sorry, I'm not sure how I'm going to manage people still coming in. That's okay. Yeah, so the grand finals will start on Friday the 9th, and they'll go through till Thursday the 15th. So the Thursdays, so we start and we do our junior grand finals first, and then we finish them off, and then we finish the seniors last. So the last day of school is Friday the 16th. That's the last day of term 3, but we should be done by that last day. On our Ballarat domestic finals, we have one scorer per court generally for the semi-final week, and then for grand final we ideally like to have 2, so then that way A, we have unbiased people on the score bench, and B, to make sure that especially parents and supporters can actually enjoy the game and not have to stress about scoring at the same time. Obviously, post-COVID, our numbers have been a little scarce. Kira did a really good job. The last grand final series we had, she did manage to get all the courts covered, I believe. Kira?
I think I struggled with a lot of the Friday night and Saturday stuff, but I was also in isolation myself, which took me out
of a large
doing
number of
anything. Yeah. So I think we really struggle on the Saturday because we go all day. Like we start at 9 o'clock and go right through until the last game. So the Friday night and the Saturday, and because games start at 5 o'clock, I find a lot of people can't get from work in time or anything like that. So the early games on Friday nights and most of Saturday, we really struggle with it at like last season. Yeah.
So yeah, ideally we'd like to have one person on all courts for the semi-finals, just so that they can act as, I guess, that mediator and make sure that everything's aligning between the 2 scorers that are still provided by the teams. And then for the grand finals is when they would take over and they would actually score for the teams themselves. And then obviously I've also got there 3 for Monday A grade games, because we do have the shot clock running. So for these games, we also need an extra person running that as well. For our domestic finals, I've put age restrictions will apply, but it'll probably just come down to who we have interested to help us out with the domestic finals. We don't really want to put an age restriction on it, but obviously if we have, a 10-year-old child keen to help, that's great and well, but we can't have a 10-year-old in charge of 2 adults. So I would say the age restriction would ideally probably be 16, because that's what the Victorian Scoretable and Basketball Association has as their cutoff. But depending on numbers, we may give some leniency for maybe 14 or 15-year-olds. But adults, definitely ideal. So into a bit of the role of a scorer on our domestic finals. Basically, it's just to facilitate the score bench, make sure that you're helping the scorers, ensuring that they've got all the correct information, they know how to use everything, they make sure everything's recorded properly, making sure that the scoreboard's right, starting and stopping the clock on time, that sort of thing. And if there's any issues, helping them out. We want to make sure we're educating. So if somebody's unsure on how to enter something, hopefully by the end of this little workshop, everybody on here will have a little bit more of an understanding about how to use the iPad and the timing rules and that sort of thing. And it's really just the importance of communication between scorers. So even for just in general, once you guys go away from this, outside of finals, it's just making sure that you've got the open lines of communication between yourself and whoever you're scoring with. Sorry, Kira, if you want to speak, you've been muted, but you'll have to unmute yourself. Yes, this is really important, even if it is just a round game. If there is a foul, just making sure, hey, you got the same foul as me. Yep, all good, no worries. And then that way there's no issues if it is a close game, or if you're not quite sure if, the other scorer's recorded something properly, whether it be on the scoreboard or on the iPad. It's just good to keep those communication lines open with each other. So I'll go on to how to use the iPad. So pretty much the idea of this workshop is to try and give some people a little bit more knowledge around scoring so that we can hopefully use people on our domestic finals. Now, this is appointed by Kira, and it does require, most people can try and do a whole night if they like. Others may just do 1 or 2 games, maybe just around, say, their child playing or their partner playing on a senior game, that sort of thing. But it just helps Kira assist with trying to get that unbiased scorer onto each game and cover everything. So how to use the iPad. So we'll go through filling in players, how to record our normal fouls and goals, any special situations, anything like that, and also how to undo actions and find your event log and that sort of stuff. So fill in players, anybody for the finals series, any eligible players will already be listed on the iPad. If it gets to finals and there's somebody not listed and they want to add themselves, that this should only be done by a supervisor. If they're not on the iPad, it could mean that they're ineligible. There generally is lists sent out by the competitions manager prior to the games to make sure everybody's on the same page. But obviously some people either maybe fly under the radar, or they may not check it and they may be unaware that they might not have, played enough games or something like that. Obviously, there are exceptions if somebody's been given approval from the office to play, but again, the supervisors will have a list of all of these. So it should really only be up to the supervisors to be adding people in finals. So this is our starting screen. So when we click into a game, this is what it will look like. We've got nobody in the teams. It's pretty bare. So how to add them, what we would do is we would click, I'm not sure if anybody can see my cursor or not, but we click the little add button that's underneath lineup, and then this will bring up the team list, and then we can just start adding people from there. So this is what it will look like once we click that button. So it'll come up with a list of all of the players. So again, in finals, it'll come up with any eligible players that are okay to play that game. And all we do is simply tick on the blue plus on the left-hand side, and they'll transfer over onto the right-hand side, which means they're clicked in for that game. Anybody who doesn't play, we should leave on the outside to make sure that we have an accurate representation of who's actually played. And then if we want to change numbers, all we do is we add them over onto the right-hand side, and then we click on the little circle where their number is, and the keyboard will pop up and you can delete and re-add the correct number. So once we've done this for both teams, so once we finish this screen here, if we scroll down to the bottom of the screen, there would be a little done. Oh, sorry, it's up the top right corner. My apologies, up the top right. We'll click done, and then we'll go over to the other team. We'll click add, and then we'll add in the team the same as what we did the first one. And once we finish that, the screen should look a little bit more full with some players like this. So once we're ready to start, we click on the start button up the top right, and that will start our game clock. This is important to do because at the moment, on the left-hand side of the time, you'll see it says pre-game. If we don't start the clock, that means that any fouls or anything that we enter will be added to the pre-game and not to the actual first half. If this clock runs out, if it gets to 0, it doesn't matter. Still, stuff can still be entered under first half or second half, but just starting the clock is the important part. Adding fouls. So I'm sure most of you have probably done some basic scoring, but adding fouls and goals is as simple as clicking on the name or the number of who it was, and then they'll highlight in blue. And then we just click on whether it was 1 point down the bottom, the 2 points, or the 3 points, or a foul. It's really easy and it should automatically go on. It doesn't matter if you click on the person first and then the goal or the foul, or if you actually click on the goal or foul first and then select the person. If you know that there's been a foul, you could click foul first and then just try to wait to see what the referee calls and then put it on the number. Either does the same thing, it has the same outcome. Timeouts, we've got the little timeout button underneath the two team names. So the blue plus is what you would click to add a timeout to that team. And then that way it's recorded to make sure that nobody goes over their 2 timeouts per half. Editing the game clock. So next to our start button up on the top right, there's a little pencil. You can click on this and that can adjust the time. But again, other than actually starting the time for the half, it doesn't really matter what that timer is on because we go off the time that's up on the scoreboard. Team/player foul count. So the fouls and points will come up in their little columns so that you can see the breakdown of each player and their stats. And then the overall team fouls will come up just underneath the team name. There's a little whistle, and then next to that at the moment it says 0. But obviously this would be the count. So every time there's a foul added, this would go up. Again, about the game clock, it's important to make sure we start at first and second half because this is where the team fouls will be added. So if we didn't start this game clock and we started adding fouls, this would add all of those team fouls to the pre-game. Vice versa with the first half, if we had, say, 5 fouls on each team and we didn't press start to go into the second half, those fouls would still roll over and it would still say that there's 5 team fouls for each team when it should in fact reset to 0 at halftime. And then also on this screen, we've got the undo button and the event log. So at the moment, these are blanked out a little bit because the game hasn't started yet. But the bottom left-hand corner of this screen, there's a little sort of backwards button pointing to the left. This is the undo button. So this will, if you click on this button, it will undo the last button that was pressed. So if you know that you've definitely accidentally just put points on the wrong person, you can quickly click this button, delete those points, and then re-add them back on. If throughout the game you realize that you gave a foul to the wrong player or something like that and you can't, it wasn't the last thing that you did, you can go into the event log and we can fix it up. So up the top right-hand corner, just underneath the battery percentage, it says event log. If you click on this during a game, it will come up with every single action that's been entered into the system. So you'll be able to scroll through, find what happened, and then there'll be a little bin button and you're able to click on the bin and that will delete that whole action and it'll make sure everything's correct. So if there is a foul that we accidentally put on 3 but it should have been on 4, then we can just click delete on the foul on number 3 and then we can just go back in and re-add the foul as normal. Special situations, this is stuff that we hope we wouldn't have to enter, but it's nice to know where the buttons are just in case. So mainly it's all of the tech fouls, disqualifying fouls and the unsportsmanlike fouls. So down the bottom of the screen next to foul, there were 3 buttons. If you click on this screen will pop up. So it'll give you a list of all of the special types of fouls that we can have in a game. And as normal, you would just click on one of these and then you would click on the player's name or vice versa. And it will add it as basically a normal foul sort of thing. Bench techs versus coaches techs. So not that it's, it matters a little bit in domestic. There's not many times that it would happen, but this sort of stuff is important for, because if there's a certain number of techs thrown, depending whether it's bench or coach, the coach can be ejected from the game. So it's important to note whether the tech was on the coach, if the referees have said that, or whether they've said that it was on the bench. So the way to add it on the coach, usually, and I don't know if we'll be able to see the screen. Oh, yeah, there we go. So it depends on how the domestic clubs have their system set up in the back end. A lot of the clubs have the coaching staff added, which is really helpful. So we can, if we wanted at the start of the game, click on the add button under coaching staff and it should come up with who they've appointed. If not, it's not too much of a stress. It's just something we've got to remember. But to give a bench or a coach tech, we click on the team name and then we can click on tech foul. So that way we're not putting it against any of the players on the court, we're not penalising them, but we're still making sure that that tech foul is recorded. So next time you're scoring, have a fiddle, but if you do click on the team name, they will highlight in blue and they can have points and fouls added to them just like a player can. End of a period or end of the game. So like I said before, it's important to make sure we end the first half to transition into the second half to make sure especially those team fouls are correct. So if we find that we haven't had the clock run down and it is half time, if you wanted to try and fast track it, you can click on these 3 buttons in the top left-hand corner and there'll be a little screen come up like this. It says end period. If you click on that, that will just finish the first half and it'll reset the clock automatically for the second half. And then once the second half's finished and the clock zeroes out, the end period button won't be there. It will just be the last 4. So all we would need is end game. Usually we try to get the referees to end the game just to make sure they can check over, make sure everything looks okay. Because once this is done, the only way the scores can be edited is in the back end. So it's just good to make sure that maybe the supervisors or the referees do this. The forfeit, abandon, and reset game buttons we generally don't use. Again, this would, if anything, be a supervisor that would use these buttons. I can't really think of a time we would need to reset the game unless our system glitch or something like that. Abandon game, we have our own policies in place for situations like this. So it's always best to make sure we just leave the game as is. And then from an office point of view, we can work out whether the score stands or whatever happens with it. And then forfeit game, 9 times out of 10, if we know that there's going to be a walkover, we'll have this entered beforehand. So we won't have to use this button at all. All right, so our domestic timing rules in Ballarat. So our warm-up period is 3 minutes. It's 2 minutes if we're running behind schedule, but usually for finals, we do try to appoint an hour time slot. So we've got a bit of extra time up our sleeve. And especially for finals, we like to make sure that everybody's got a good amount of time to get out on court before they actually have to start. The periods are 2 20-minute halves, which is nice and easy. Half time is 1 minute. So as a scorer, it's good practice to try and get into as soon as half time hits, quickly reset the clock, get it to 1 minute and start it straight away just so that we're running on time. Timeouts are 30 seconds. Now this is a little bit probably not well known by a lot of players and coaches in Ballarat. We don't opt for the 1 minute timeout like the FIBA rulebook just because we're on such a tight schedule. So generally these are only 30 seconds, which goes by really quickly when you're used to a minute. For all timeouts, the clock always stops. And then in our finals, it's good practice to try and time these timeouts. So whether that be just to have your phone sitting in front of you with a stopwatch on it, or whether you actually have some type of stopwatch that you can take yourself. But as soon as the timeout starts, we should start that. And when it gets to about 20 seconds, we just give a buzzer just to let the referees and the players know that there's only 10 seconds remaining of the timeout. And that way they can come in a little bit quicker and they're a bit more aware. So clock stops for all timeouts at any stage during the game and also for all whistles in the last minute of the second half. We do not stop the clock after a goal in the last minute. It's only when the referee blows the whistle. The clock recommences from a timeout at the referee's discretion. So this is largely around if we have a timeout and then we've got free throws, the clock will start as soon as the timeout's finished. So the free throws it will be running for all of the game, except obviously in that last 1 minute. And then if we have any unusual delays for injury, usually the referee will blow their whistle and then unless it's in the last minute of the game, we will keep the clock running, just see if the person can get up straight away. If they can't, usually the referees will yell out and just say, can we please have the clock stopped? Or they'll have a timeout, a referee's timeout to try and get the person off the court safely. Clock stoppages and restarting. So like we mentioned, clock stops on all timeouts and the last minute of the second half on all whistles. So as a scorer, in the last minute especially, as soon as you hear a whistle, just stop the clock straight away. There's no certain calls that it stops for or doesn't stop for. Every time there is a referee's whistle, the clock will stop. It starts again once it touches a player on the playing court. So again, this is a little bit of a misconception from people. The clock does not start once the ball is passed, I guess, out of the throw-in person's hands. It doesn't start once it hits the court. If somebody hasn't touched it yet, it only starts once it touches a player on the court. So a lot of, especially in the seniors with the players knowing the rule a little bit better, what they'll do if they want to try and keep a bit of time up their sleeve is when they pass it in, they'll roll it along the ground and they won't touch it until they actually get to about half court, and then they'll pick it up. So this is trying to save time. So it's important to make sure that we don't start that clock early, because the whole idea of them not picking it up straight away is to try and keep as much time on the clock as possible.
I have to say, like, the referees are usually pretty good with that, especially in the last minute. Like, you'll see them. We all know that when they want to blow their whistle, they put their hand straight up in the air. If it's a foul, it's generally a clenched fist. Most of them will hold their hand in the air, and when the ball has been touched, they'll drop it to say, like, to turn the clock back on. So, and watching the referees is something important as well, to know, like, when to start the clock and in that last 1 minute as well.
Yeah, so if you've got one of our more experienced referees, they should know, like Kira said, they'll keep their hand up, and then once the ball touches a player on the playing court, they'll do a chopping action down with their hand, and then that's an indication for the scorers to start the clock again. So if you're a bit unsure and you do have a referee that's doing that, it is really helpful. But also, probably more on the Saturdays, some of the referees may not have learned that skill yet. So it's just nice to know that it is once it touches a player on the court. Subs and timeouts. So in Ballarat, each team is allowed 2 timeouts per half. And like we mentioned before, that's 30-second duration for each of them. Timeouts can be called after any whistle from the referee or after the opposition scores. So if Black want a timeout, they can only have one after the other team scores. So say if it was Black versus White, Black can have a timeout when White scores, White can have a timeout when Black scores. But Black can't have a timeout if Black scores. I hope that makes sense to everybody. That's a bit of a mouthful.
It is.
But also, yeah, any whistles, timeout can definitely be given. And then subs can only be on a whistle, so they can't be after a goal, other than obviously our free throws if the shooter is being subbed and they get their second goal in. The clock will stop for all charged timeouts and referee timeouts, so just all timeouts in general. And then, like we said, it will be switched on once the referees are happy that the game's ready to commence again. Just a very, very brief slide on shot clock. I'm not sure how many people have actually scored with shot clock. It is a bit to try and get your head around, trying to flick the time on and off, reset the buttons, that sort of thing. But it's really not too difficult. The easiest way to remember it is shot clock only resets on really 3 main reasons. Obviously, the change of possession if the other team gets the ball. If the ball hits the ring, so this is the ring, not the backboard. If the ball only hits the backboard, we don't reset. It's only if it hits the ring. And then for foot violations or any fouls. But again, most of the referees that are doing shot clock should know, and they should be able to help you and tell you to reset. And this is only in our A grade Monday night men and women competitions. So this is not across the board. It's not on any other nights. So it's very limited games. We run a full 24 and 14-second reset in Ballarat. Pardon me. Any VJBL games that we have, there's only 24-second reset. They don't use the 14-second. But in our domestic competitions for the seniors, we do use both. And I've also just got listed there shot clock resets to 24 in the backcourt, and if there's any of the above where the shot clock should reset in the front court, it would be on 14 seconds unless it's above 14. So say we stop the clock on 16 and there was a foul in the front court, it would just stay on 16 because we don't want to reset it to 14 and disadvantage a team by giving them 2 seconds less. All right, so how to get involved and what's required. So like I said, Kira creates all of the rosters for our domestic finals, and she does all of this based on availability. So we'll get a form together and we'll send it out to everybody just to be able to get some contact details, some bank details, and also a little bit of availability to be able to pass on to her. The expectation is that uniform is mainly just smart casual, not rocking up in trackies or anything like that. Just making sure, you know, something nice and professional. Jeans are fine, and, you know, just making sure that you're looking the part. Professionalism is important. We ask that if there is any conflict games, that if Kira does roster you to those, that you say, hey, look, you know, my family member is playing in this game or whatever it may be, to make sure that we can try and keep the scoring body as unbiased as possible to be able to help cater and service for our domestic games. And then reliability and commitment. This is really important. Kira does a really good job of making sure that she can roster all of our games and make sure that there's at least one scorer on everything, but it makes it really difficult if somebody pulls out last minute. So we do ask that, you know, if you do commit to a game, that you just try to stick with it for us.
I can usually have it covered in about an hour. Like I like 2 hours notice, but if it's really emergency and you need, like, you can only give me an hour, I can usually get it covered in an hour as well. So
yeah. And then becoming accredited scorer. I'll close this and we'll put faces back on the screen. Share. Go. So becoming an accredited scorer. So like we said at the start, the main objective for this workshop was to try and give a bit more knowledge, so hopefully be able to get some people interested in helping with the domestic scoring. And then from that, we'd like to try and make some sort of pathway where if you're interested in this sort of stuff, or you found that you really enjoyed scoring the domestic finals, we can try to start then transitioning you to work out how can we get you accredited as a level 1, which will then start to be able to help you to potentially do leagues if you were interested in reffing that next step and getting a bit more knowledge in this space. If anybody was interested, we do have people who only want to do domestic finals and they just like to help us at the end of every season just with helping with the domestic side of things, and they have no interest in leagues. That's quite okay too, no issues. We're happy to try and cater for whatever anybody would like to do in that space. But like we said, if you do find it interesting and you do want to get accredited and do some better quality games, I guess, then there's definitely a pathway there also. So does anybody have any questions or anything from any of the slides or anything that we didn't cover that you would like clarified? Anything like that? Anything about rostering for domestic finals? No, everybody's happy. Kira, did I cover everything for you?
I think so, Chloe. Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Cool. All right, perfect. So what we'll do is I'll put together a form and I'll send it out to everybody that has attended tonight. And if you are interested in helping with some domestic finals, could be 1 game, could be 50 games. I mean, whatever you guys are keen to do. If you just fill out the form with your availability, then Kira will be able to get in touch and get that all sorted.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody, for jumping on. We appreciate it. Hopefully we'll talk to you all soon.
Chloe, can I keep you for a second, please?
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks.
Stop the recording.